Tractate Cירובין, פ"ו, page 86, משנה. המניח ביתו והלך לשבות בעיר אחרת, אחד נוכרי ואחד ישראל, הרי זה אוסר, דברי רבי מאיר. רבי יהודה אומר אינו אוסר. A fellow Jew leaves his home and he planning to spend Shabbat some other places. The question is, what's going to happen in the status of his property on Shabbat? Why? Because we are speaking here about a fellow that have a partnership, a shared courtyard with other people in that development. And since he spent Shabbat in a different town, so makes no difference if it's a Jew or non-Jew, in that domain, meaning regardless if you rent his domain to other fellows in that area or not. You remember we study on page 61b about a non-Jew that live in that domain that can created a prohibition for using that domain if he's not renting his part to the fellows. In other words, in order to make the Eruv properly, we need to have the entire people in development participate. So if you have any issue of anybody who's not part of that, he needs to share his part by renting it to others, and then they will be able to partake of the Eruv, which is a combination of all the residents. So he hold that in that situation, caring, or may hold that caring for other residents is the issue, since that fellow have a house in that domain. Let's call him Reuven, and Reuven has a partnership of that courtyard. Even he's not living there right now, we hold that anybody who's partake of that development, even he is not physically there, is still the owner of that, and therefore as far as the Eruv is concerned, he can carry the prohibition for other people to move items in that domain at that time. That's the Tosfot Rabbi Akiva Iger and the foundation of Rashi in this Mishnah. The Sfat Emet elaborated that, and he explained that the whole idea of Gzeira is decree that it may happen that that fellow returned to his domain on Shabbat. In a non-Jew situation, it's only in the circumstance that he can come back on Shabbat. In a fellow Jew, it's the idea that even if he's far away, because this is the boundaries the rabbis made, that maybe they switch and twisted with a situation that he lived close by. So in short, Rabbi Meir said that it's like if you own a property, let's say in Arizona or in Florida, and you're not renting it, but you own that property, then automatically you are responsible for that property. So in our language, you're responsible for what? For taxes, right? For things like that. In the Mishnah, in the term of the Eruv, is as long as you do not rent in some form of renting for that Shabbat with other people in the development, you carry a prohibition for others to carry in that courtyard. That's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda goes the other way around, and he said, no, it's not an issue. He says, since Reuven, he's not now on this upcoming Shabbat in the state of Maryland, he's in this Shabbat go to his children in California. So therefore, he says, it is true that legally he's the owner of that property, but he flew 10 hours from here, and therefore it's not considering a dwelling place that forbidden other people in that development from carrying from one domain to another. The Biur Halacha, which we deal later in Shin Ayin Aleph in 371, so he said that that's applied to both non-Jew and New-Jew, but we'll do it later in the practical halachot. Now, after we heard the two opinions, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, now we go to the third opinion. It is the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi אומר, נוכרי אוסר, ישראל אינו אוסר, שאין דרך ישראל לבוא בשבת. Beautiful. He said it's depend. He said, if you have an issue of a non-Jew, that he is out of the city, out of state for that Shabbat, for that Saturday, so even that his place of dwelling is not considering something that's forbidden because he's not living there at this very moment, but since there is a concern that he maybe return to his home on Shabbat, so therefore we say that in that situation it's forbidden. However, if you have a fellow Jew that live here in the state of Maryland and he goes to California, so he said no, since he's far away and he's not going to come on Shabbat, on Saturday, so therefore it's not an issue. Why? And he said something that is so simple and clear. He said, think about it. It's any manner of a Jew to come home on Shabbat, even physically. If he tells you today is, let's say, if today it's middle of the week or Thursday, and he flew and he called you from California and he says, I wish you a good Shabbos, okay? He's now in California. It's impossible for him to come back on Shabbat, right?
Yeah.
Or even you say that it's not so far. Let's say he went to a different location, that it's still in a walking distance, but it's a different city. Like for example, he went from Riva, from Edgewater, to let's say Davidsonville. That it's still a possibility to walk from one domain to another. Yet, according to Rabbi Yossi, it's very unlikely to do it. A fellow Jew not return home. He says that his empty residence does not render it prohibited. But the issue with the non-Jew, he said that's a possibility. Therefore, he differentiated between these two. Fourth opinion, which is Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon אומר, אפילו הניח ביתו והלך לשבות אצל ביתו באותה העיר, אינו אוסר, שכבר הסיע מליבו. Oh, that's so beautiful. He said, let's say, if a fellow Jew left his home and he went to spend Shabbat with his daughter. So let's say his daughter lives in the same town. Let's say if that fellow lives in Silver Spring and his daughter lives in the same town but in a different domain. And he is staying on Shabbat at her house. Okay? So now what happened then? Now it's a possibility that he maybe come back. So he said does not render prohibited. Why? Because he already removed his mind that he's not going to come back to his house. So now the Gemara brought a final ruling, which is again beautiful. After we heard four opinions, right? Mm-hmm. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Shimon. So the Gemara said, "Halacha amarav halacha ki Rabbi Shimon." Going by halacha according to Rabbi Shimon. So the poskim said that the word of Rabbi Shimon applied to fellow Jew. So what we're going to say now in Rabbi Shimon, it's not applied to a non-Jew. Now, what did he say an exception? He says, "V'davka bito, aval bno lo, de'amre inshei navach bakal ba'ul, navach baguriya tapuk." Oy. He said, here is the story. If he goes to stay with his son, with his daughter, so then forget it. He's going to stay by his daughter and he's going to stay there for the entire Shabbat. But listen carefully. That's especially for you, for David, but can apply to others. I think that other people take it also seriously. So he said, a man go to stay Shabbat with his daughter, he will stay there for the entire Shabbat. If it go to his son, meaning to his daughter-in-law, it's a possibility for him to come back on Shabbat. Why? He says, because people use the term, if you have a male dog bark on you, so come back to the house. Why? You don't have an issue because with male barking dog you can reconcile. But he says with the female there is an issue. What does that mean? So in a practical manner, what they try to tell here in the Talmud, and that's Rabbeinu Hananel explanation, he says, when you go to your daughter, and those of you who were blessed with son and daughter-in-law, they know the business. Okay, when you go to the daughter, so if it's any confrontation in the family, what's going to happen? You said, okay, goodbye, I'm leaving, right? And your daughter run to the door and she says, Dad, don't leave, stay here, right? Versus if it's your son and daughter-in-law, so your son go by his wife many times, right? That's what they said here. I'm not making it up. So therefore, the reality is that if it's a fight, if it's a conflict in their house, what you're going to do? You're going to stand up and say goodbye and you leave, right? So he said, what Rabbi Shimon said, that a person leave his home and his mind is not to return, even he live in the same town, applies solely to his daughter. Because anything that happened during Shabbat, he will stay there. Okay? Now the Rambam, I look at the faces, okay? Now the Rambam, in chapter 4, in Hilchot Eiruvin, the Rambam rule like Rabbi Yossi. He said that in regard to a non-Jew, if the non-Jew returned to his house on Shabbat, he carry a prohibition in that yard. The Rosh and the Rashba hold the same as Rabbi Yehuda, that the non-Jew not carry any prohibition in any form. The code say, which we're going to do in the practical halacha in 371, he bring both opinion, and the Rema of Moshe Isserlich hold the way that we hold lenient. But we deal with that later in a practical halacha. Mishnah, בור שבין שתי חצרות, אין ממלאים ממנו בשבת, אין אלא אם כן עשו לו מחיצה גבוה 10 טפחים, בין מלמטה בין מתוך עוגנו. One domain, second domain. Kosher mechitza, kosher partition between the two domains. There is a water in that bore, in that pit. And you have here, why I said kosher partition, because if you look carefully, you see how it made. It's go all the way. So later in the Gemara we explain Arvei Maya, that the water, it's considering combination of both. So they said you should not use, in those days they used to take something and pull out the water from that pit. So they said you cannot use it. Why? Because if it doesn't have this mechitza, this partition of 10 handbreadth, so you cannot carry the two. So in other words, they have the eruv independently, but as long as they don't make it together, it's a separate domain as far as the eruv is concerned. Now, you may say that even the bottom is not touch the water, but the sages are more lenient when it's come to pull out the water from the bore. Later we study the subject that's called gud achit, that you pull and the partition as long as they have aginut, meaning they have the organ, the power that hold within the ball. But we go later in the Gemara and we explain it. So that's the Tanakama. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel אומר, בית שמאי אומרים מלמטה. So Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel did not disagree with Tanakama. He just said that what you said, it's another disputation between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai said that milemata, ובית הלל אומרים מלמעלה. So, meaning, soon, okay, in the Gemara soon we explain the what's involved here. אמר רבי יהודה, לא תהא מחיצה גדולה מן הכותל שביניהם. Which means, this is the separation, the wall between the two. So you don't need to go and Rashi explain, even it's not enter the domain of the organ of that, is no need. Is no need. The partition is no better than the wall between them. The wall that dividing the two courtyard passes over the board, the pit, the cistern, and therefore it is not necessary to erect an additional partition in the cistern airspace. Okay? Omar Ravuna. So now, what we said so far. So Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel hold that the machlok, the disputation between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, it's specifically if it's applied to lemata, to the bottom part. Amar Ravuna. Ravuna said, that's a picture number 292. Here we zoom in the cistern, the bore. Amar Ravuna, lemata, lemata mamash. Lemala, lemala mamash. So he said, when you deal with below, it's really below, which means deep below, be'omek ha'chafira. Okay? That this part doesn't need to be connected to the water. It's deep. Okay? And what Beit Hillel said, lemala, it's the top, which means this part, when you talk in the bottom, it's a Beit Shammai, that you need to put that attached to the water, and according to Beit Hillel, this part has to attach to that part, to the surface portion. Veze babor, and I said both, meaning the lemata that Beit Shammai said and lemala that Beit Hillel said, both apply to what? To that bore, to that the airspace of the citron. Okay?
Yes.
Now, if you don't have 10 handbreadth of that partition go from this entrance to inside, so everyone agree that you cannot use that water to pour out the water on Shabbat. The only difference is that Beit Hillel hold that this part of the partition doesn't need to attach the water. Another opinion, number 293 in the Me'orot HaDaf, ורבי יהודה אמר, למטה למטה מן המים, למעלה למעלה מן המים. So here we inside the cistern. So the idea is that Rabbi Yehuda said, when Beit Shammai said lemata, it means within the water. This is the petition. And Beit Hillel said that it's attached to the water here in this part. Now they have an issue to understand how we get to that point. So Amar le Rabba bar Rav Chanan le Abaye, Hada Amar Rabbi Yehuda lemata lemata min hamayim, ma yishna lemata mamash ולא דארי ומאיה, הדארי ולמטה מן המים נמי מאיה. He said, how you get to that point? He said that below, meaning below the water. And what's the difference actually below? Because the water become intermingled beneath the partition. So below the water, he says, what's the difference? Below the water, near the bottom of the cistern, as well as the water that it's of the two courtyard, become intermingled above it. So he said, אמר לי, לא שמיע לך, הדאמר רב יהודה אמר רב, ומה תרובה משום רבי חייא, צריך שיראו ראשן של קנין למעלה מן המים טפח. He said that he has to have this part above the water 1 handbreadth, which means that it will ensure that there is a full partition between the two sides of the cistern. So he said, "V'tua de'amar Rav Yehuda lemala lemala min hamayim, ma yishna lemala mamash delo da'ari v'maya, lemala min hamayim name ari v'maya." He says, what's the idea in the partition at the top of this cistern? That according to Rav Yehuda it's not kasher, it's not valid, even according to Beit Hillel. Why? Because the water is intermingled and it's clear under that partition, so you don't recognize that the partition separated between the water of one courtyard to the water of the other one, the second one. But if you have this partition deep in a cistern, that it's close to the water, the surface of the water, so even under that part of the water, it's no clear separation, it's not clear, you cannot differentiate between the water of each of that domain, of each courtyard. So why Beit Hillel allowed to have this type of partition deep in that cistern, that it's not getting deep in the water and separate between the water in both sides of the cistern? So Amar Lei Abaye respond to Rabba bar Rav Chanan, and he said, Lo shmi'a lach hadetane Yaakov karchina'a, צריך שישקע ראשי קנים במים טפח. He said that you need to put the part of the kanim of that kaneh, the wood part, at least in a tefach, in one handbreadth, so it will be clear that there is a partition in the water. So in other words, according to Beit Shammai, that partition need to be a clear separation between the two domains in the cistern, and therefore it has to be a 1 hand breadth above the water surface, and in which go deep down, it has to go to the bottom of the cistern. And Beit Hillel said, no, it's enough that you recognize that there is a partition. So look at the picture and you understand, hopefully, that according to Beit Shammai, this is one sign, but you have to go all the way to the bottom. According to Beit Hillel, you just need to have, in our simple language, a symbol of mechitza, of partition. So you have it a little bit here, but you see something there. So it's already considering a separation. So now, what we understand? We understand that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the mechitza needs to go deep in the water, even according to the opinion of Beit Hillel. Why? Because we need to have a heiker, we need to see a recognition of a separation between the two water in the two sides of the cistern. So now the Gemara derived from that a very important point, and they said, look at the picture number 295. ואל אחד אמר רב יהודה קורה 4 מטרת בחורבה, ורב נחמן אמר רבא ברבוע קורה 4 מטרת במים. So here you see the cistern. So he said, what if the beam of 4 handbreadth, okay, it's permits one to use to carry in the underneath or in a rune. So if a cross beam of 4 handbreadth wide is laid across the wall of a rune, its edge are viewed through the descent to the ground on each side, and thereby forming partition that permit one to carry under the cross beam. You see, you have imaginary line, and you have the part of the fellow, another part here, and this is make the difference. So here when you pull it, you can pull above the separate line, and you use it. And Rav Nachman said, name of Rabba Baravua, that he says a cross beam of 4 handbreadth led across the cistern located between the 2 courtyards permits one to draw water from the cistern. So we just turned the page, 86b. So the Gemara asks, Haka azil dli leidach gisa umaite. So they said, according to Rabbi Yehuda, think about this dli. What's going to happen? It can go to the domain of the fellow, and you know dli. Dli is like move around, right? So it can turn to the fellow and use it on Shabbat. You see, this is the separation line. So how good is it? So the Gemara said, Kimru lel Rabbanan, the end dli ma'alech yoter ma'arba tefachim. The sages hold that the dli, the bucket, does not drift more than 4 handbreadth from the point where it was lower. So therefore it stays its original side of the partition. So the Gemara asks, Tachat Korah miha ha'arivei maya. So they said the water becomes intermingles under the cross beam. So therefore the bucket will bring up water from the other courtyard. Ela, but rather He said, משום דקלו שהקלו חכמים במים. So, there's a special leniency that the sages made in the water. Rashi said that they allow to make a partition at the piabo, at the surface of the cistern, even his part of the cistern is way above the water surface. Even this part is way above the water surface. Why? So the whole idea is the going by Beit Hillel that follow Rav Huna. כי דהבאה מן רביתיו למרב מחיצה תלויה מהו שתתיר בחורבה. He asked if you have a suspended partition that it permits carrying in a room. אמר לי אין מחיצה תלויה מטרת אלא במים קלו שקלו חכמים במים. So he said the same thing. He says a suspended partition of the kind permits carrying only in the case of water, and that's one of those leniencies that the sages have in a matter of water. We learn in the Mishnah, Amar Rabbi Yehuda lo tiyeh mechitzah. Rabbi Yehuda said that there is no need for partition in the cistern, as the partition inside the cistern is no better than the wall above. Amar Rabba bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yehuda be'shitat Rabbi Yossi Amara. Rabbi Yehuda said that this kotel, this wall between the 2 yards that is separate and you can put the water above, it's the Amar mechitzat luya materet afilu bayabasha. He said that the suspended partition permits carrying even on land because it's considered that it's descendant to the ground and seal off the area. So it's no need to erect a partition inside the airspace of the cistern, and it's the special leniency that the sages said with the water, not like what the Rab said. So he said Ditnan, here we go to bring another source from Tractate Sukkah, page 16, and we're going to use it as a proof that Rabbi Yossi allow partition even in the dry land, even in the above ground situation. Ditnan, we learn in the Tractate Sukkah. Picture number 296. המשלשל דפנות מלמעלה למטה בזמן שגבוהות מן הארץ 3 טפחים פסולה. So this is the sukkah, and someone put down the walls, lower the walls. He go from the top to the bottom. So as long as you have 3 handbreadth from the ground, it's invalid. So Rashi said, because what? The dayim bokimba. Because you see this little sweet goat? This guy can come in that area under the sukkah. So therefore this wall, it's not valid. Mm-hmm. Okay? Now think about it. What did he do? He go from the top to the bottom. So this little goat can sneak in. Is the 3 handbreadth from the ground, and it's make it invalid. Mimata lemala. So he said, but if it's the opposite way, you see the next picture?
Yeah.
Okay. If he did it from the bottom to the top, now it's all black, but it's not reaching the schach, the roof, right? In gvod 10 טפחים כשרה. They said as long as you have the 10 handbreadth. So it's fine, because the minimum requirement is a 10 handbreadth. רבי יוסי אומר, כשם שמלמעלה למטה 10, כך מלמעלה למטה 10. He says, the same way that this need to be 10, the other need to be 10. So therefore it's not an issue with the space, because he holds that partition that is still hanging, mechitzat tluya, it's still considering a proper partition. But the Gemara rejected it, it said, Velohi, it's incorrect. Lo Rabbi Yehuda savar la כרבי יוסי ולא רבי יוסי סבר לה כרבי יהודה. Neither one is correct. רבי יהודה לא סבר לה כרבי יוסי, עד כאן לא קמה רבי יהודה אלא בעירובי חצרות דרבנן, אבל סוכה דאורייתא לא. He says all of that apply to a joining partition that is a rabbinic. But with sukkah, since it's a biblical, you know that we have this halacha leMoshe Sinai in Sukkot. So it's considering a biblical precept. So since it's required by Torah law, so he doesn't need to say that we can rely on unsuspended partition. The other way around, ולא רבי יוסי סבר לה כרבי יהודה, עד כאן לא קמה רבי יוסי אלא בסוכה, the איסור עשה, that it's a positive commandment in the Torah. But אבל Shabbat איסור סקילה הוא לא, but in Shabbat is the punishable by סקילה, which is a capital, biblical capital punishment. So it's not stated opinion. So therefore Rabbi Yossi might agree that we must be very stringent with regard to halachot Shabbat, even those that they are rabbinic in origin. ואם תאמר אותו מעשה שנעשה בציפורי על פי מה נעשה, if you tell me that Rabbi Yossi hold that מחיצה תלויה, that hanging partition is you cannot render permission to use it on Shabbat. This is a famous story in a city of North Israel called Tzipori, that they allowed to carry hanging mechitza there. According to him, Rabbi Yossi was the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the Yeshiva in Tzipori, so he must probably approve it, Rashi said. So he said, no, לא על פי רבי יוסי, על פי רבי ישמעאל ברבי יוסי נעשה. It wasn't by his ruling, but by Rabbi Ishmael, and son of Rabbi Yossi, meaning that it was after Rabbi Yossi passed. So here is the story. דחיית הרב דימי אמר, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylon, he said, פעם אחת שכלו ולא הביאו ספר תורה מבעוד יום. It happened one time that they forget in the city of Tzipori and bringing Sefer Torah in advance before Shabbat. So, in other words, the Sefer Torah was in a private home before Shabbat, and it was in the yard between that private home to the synagogue, but the issue is that the courtyard between that house and the synagogue has no eruv. So basically it's the issue to carry the Sefer Torah from that private home to the synagogue. Okay? So what did they do? למחר פרסו סדין על העמודים. So what they do, they following day with Shabbat, they sprayed a sheet over the pillars, positioned between the house where the Torah was kept in the synagogue, and thereby forming some type of corridor with partitions suspended on each side. And then והביאו ספר תורה וקראו בו. So they brought the Sefer Torah toward that shvil, toward that a small line, and they read it, because it wasn't any other house to that shvil. So it's like private domain of that owner because of the other people of that yard. So since we bring that story, we bring a question that relates to that late story, and they said, Persu, you're going to tell me that this is something that is very surprising. You said that they did really actually spread sheets on Shabbat? Lechatchila mishari. You're going to tell me that you do this type of lechatchila to take full bechitza, full partition in Shabbat lechatchila, have an issue. כל מודים שנושאים אור אל הרי בשבת. Everybody agree that cannot make a temporary a tent on Shabbat. You cannot erect a temporary tent on Shabbat. אלא מצאו סדינים פרוסים במלומדים והביאו ספר תורה וקראו בו. No, they found sheets spread over the pillars, which they used as partitions, and in this manner they brought the Torah scroll to the synagogue and read from it. Now we find another Tana that also hold leniency in the partition to use the water. Amar Rabba Rabbi Yehuda v'Chanan ben Akavya amru davar echad. He says that both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Chanan ben Akavya, they said both the same. And now I explain. Rabbi Yehuda ad Amaran, Rabbi Chanina ben Akavya. So they said as follows. Here you have this 10 hand breadth, and you have the 4 in between. All together is 24. You see 10, 4, 4 here, and this is another 10. So Rashi explained. You see? Oh, בתניא, רבי חנניה בן עקביה אומר, גזוזתרה שיש בה 400 על 400, חוקק בה 4 על 4 וממלא. So the idea is, in order, basically the water is considering a carmelite, and you cannot pull out the water. In order to make it happen, you need to make something that's like Reshut HaYachid, a private domain. We explain in page 84. So the idea here is, I just try to make abbreviation running out of time between Rashi and Tosfot. It's the idea that he built this type of partition, and we basically hold that it's like you take this part and pull it down to the water level, so you can go ahead and use the water in order to use the water on Shabbat. So it basically he can curve in a hole 4 by 4 handbreadth and draw water from it, because even it's no real partition around the hole, but still the section surrounding the wall is considered that it's a bend downward and form a partitions that 10 handbreadth high in all aisles. That's the way mainly Rashi understand it. So it's permitted to draw water through the hole. So that's the way originally it's built, and that's the way he chokek, he built, and therefore that's the way we look upon using the water. Because otherwise it's an issue, it's Carmelite, and only by using that it turned to be Reshut HaYachid. So the Gemara challenged that. We are on page 87-8. אמר לאביי ודילמה לא היא, עד כאן לא קמה רבי יהודה התם אלא דאמר גוד אחיד מחיצתא, אבל קוף וגוד לא. He said that's what Rabbi Yehuda stated. There is the wall. He said it applied to the extend and lower the petition, but the idea of bend the petition and extend it downward, that's Rabbi Yehuda ben Ara. It's no, he's not accept this principle to bend it. So he said, ועד כאן לא קמה רבי חנניה בן עקביה, הטעם, אלא בימה של טבריה, הואיל ויש לה עוגנים ועיירות וקרפיפות, מקיפות לה, אבל בשאר מימות לא. He says all the idea that in the case of balcony, it's regard to the Sea of Tiberia, which means the Sea of Galilee, the Kinneret, since it was clearly defined as a banks around her. The town are enclosures surrounded in all sides. However, with regard to other waters, he's not, Rabbi Chananya ben Akavia did not permit the practice. אמר אביי, ולדברי חנניה בן עקביה, הייתה סמוכה לכולל פחות מ3 טפחים, צריך שיהיה אורכה 400 ורוחבה 11 ומשהו. So he said, according to Rabbi Hanania ben Akavia, the balcony was less than 10 handbreadth away from the wall. It is permitted to draw water from it in the following circumstances. If the length must be 4 cubit and the width must be 11 handbreadth at any amount, so you basically carving the wall slightly, a little bit. So he said, if you do that, more than 1 handbreadth by 4 handbreadth on the side near the wall, alongside the other 3 handbreadth, one creates a wall of 4 handbreadth by 4 handbreadth. So this hole surrounded by partition 10 handbreadth high on each side. So because the wall itself is 1 partition, the 4 cubit length in view is bent down on both sides of the wall, so it's basically formulation of 2 separate partition of each 10 handbreadth, and the remaining 10 handbreadth of the width, you see is it's well bent down, and it's created a partition on the 4 side of the balcony. Another situation, he says, הייתה זקופה, צריך שיהיה גובה 10 טפחים ורוחבה 6 טפחים ו2 משרועים. So first, the one we just discussed, so this is less than 3. This is the part that you complete of 4 טפחים, this is 24 and this is the 10, and this is 1 ומשהו. And the Rashi explained at length. Rashi explained that that's the way you move these 4. And this one is a little bit in the tefach side. Everyone see this picture?
Yes.
הייתה זקופה, צריך שיהיה גובה 10 טפחים ורוחבה 6 טפחים ו2 משרועים. So here Rashi said, וחוף שפת רוחב ומשהו לכאן לצד הכותל, והרי שפתה עכשיו בפחות מ3 סמוך לכותל, ותהא לבוד. So basically you have here 10 handbreadth. This is a little more than tefach. Lavud is the 3, less than 3, and that's the way you bend it. Does everyone see it?
Yes.
The third option, אמר רב הונא ברי דרב יהושע, הייתה עומדת בקרן זווית, צריך שיהיה גובה 10 טפחים ורוחבה 2 טפחים ו2 משרועים. You wish to have more time, but Rashi said, ומעמידה זקופה, שפת עוביה כנגד כותל האחד מופלג ממנו פחות מ3 והוא לבוד. So basically you have here, so Rashi explains that קוף טפח ומשהו היתרים על מידת רוחבה ואותה אותם לצד כותל המופלג 4. That this is 3 טפחים handbreadth, so it's lavud, and you move it a little more than 1 handbreadth, so then in that way you can set it up. ואלה לתניא רבי חנניה בן עקביה אומר גזוזתרה שיש בה 400 על 400 חוקק ב4 ומלא איך משכחת לה. He says that what type of, if it's a balcony that has a area of 4 cubit or 4 cubit and is suspended above the water, so in what circumstance the balcony have this dimension be found? So he said the avidita kiasita. So the balcony, Rashi said she'en kodel asamuch lagvua yetedot, that it's basically made in a shape of mortar, and you have this yetedot that is a basic. So in that circumstance, they constructed, and it's a floor space, and the balcony must be a 4 cubit by 4 cubit in its size. So that's a different story. Now we're going to a practical halachot. First halacha is Shulchan Aruch 371. Hameniach beito. If a fellow Jew left his home for Shabbat and he has no plan to return So he does not impose restriction on the other residents in the courtyard. That's basically Rabbi Shimon. And he said that the Rambam added that it's different when it's applied to the non-Jew, because if he went to a place from the location that he can return on Shabbat, he imposes restrictions. He does not impose restriction in the more than a day travel away from his home. That's the Rambam. The Magid Mishnah said that Rabbi Yossi's opinion is according to it's basically supported by the Rab Meir's opinion, but the Mordechai and the Rosh and the Sefer Mitzvot Gdolot and the Rema, they said that if a non-Jew who left for a nearby place does not render it prohibited for other residents to carry, and basically it's followed the Rabbi Yehuda. Another important halacha we study in regard to mechitza she'al habo, Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim 376. It is prohibited to draw water from a cistern located between the two courtyards unless a partition 10 handbreadth high is constructed over it. At least a handbreadth of this partition must be submerged beneath the water, with another handbreadth protruding above the water. Now, the Rif and the Rosh and the Rambam add to that, and it said it does not matter whether most of it is above or below the level of the water. What about Korah B'mayim? They said a cross beam 4 handbreadth wide that is placed over the opening of the cistern permit the residents of both courtyards to draw from it. That's basically what we said in Rav Nachman. And we discuss also Fanot Meshulshalot, Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim 6:30. If one hangs wall from above, so that they end 3 handbreadth above the ground, these walls do not have the status of a partition. It's an opinion in Mishnah, we don't know, it's an anonymous opinion. As for partition 10 handbreadth in high, they are considered wall in every regard, even if they do not reach the roof. The last halacha of today, it's Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim 3:15. Or Arai b'Shabbat, why may not erect even a temporary tent lechatchila and initio on Shabbat.